So people and process are the two prime elements that we use in the methodology of how to get to projects. I'll show you a series of projects. Be happy to discuss them at any point in time, at least after the lecture. But if there are questions throughout the lecture, I'm open to that too. And moving back, looking at natural environments. What is a natural environment for architecture? Remember that Jean Prouvé said architecture has nothing to resist but nature itself, which means there's always a conflict situation between architecture and nature. But you can, if you collect things that you might use later, maybe move beyond this typology of understanding architecture in contradiction to nature. This is a fairy tale person in Norwegian fairy tales. He's called Espen Askeladd. He collects everything he finds, puts it into his backpack, because he might at some point in time have to use the things he's finding. So he's a collector, but he's collecting things that throughout his life actually saves him in the most terrific and horrific situations. At the back, of course, you see the mountain Snøhetta, where he's looking at. It's full of gold. And in the same region around Snøhetta, you have reindeer, wild reindeer. And these reindeer are genetically the same reindeer that were feeding in the middle of Europe, in France, about 30,000 years ago. So there is a certain stability of collection. So when the ice pulled back from south of Europe up towards Norway, these reindeer came with. And now they're at Dovre, which is the reason why we were asked to design a reindeer pavilion in this area. Now, if you look at the wooden huts of this region, started building these type of huts about 400 years ago, you will see there is a certain proportion in them. They're repetitive. There is a generic proportion in these cabins related to the length of the log, related to the stacking of the logs. And all of this then is possible to translate into a negative. So you take the volume and that becomes the frame for the next vision into a certain landscape. Once that is being further developed with the interiors as a computer file, tested with the industrial robot we have, chosen the wood down to the smallest point, dried it, treated it, cut it, put it together, all of a sudden we can take the computer files of the wooden interior in this frame and CNC carve it. And now I think there should be some sound, but maybe there isn't. It's important to have the sound of production, because the production sound tells you there is activity. Now, once that is done, you have a small window of locating these CNC dry plugged wooden interiors in this box. That is the remainder of the log house that you saw, twisted and turned by nature back into the production line of a CNC carved element. Now this CNC form has been tested with our own industrial robot. There are no hiccups in the file, so we could actually produce 1 million of these, but they would never be the same because the choice of wood would be different every time. So don't be afraid of moving into technology, because the crafting still is a necessary part of the possibility of developing that further. So these type of things are then studies that we do on a series of tiny little buildings, which we call keyless structures. That means they don't have a key. They're open 24 hours a day. People can walk in and out. And we've been trying to get people to sort of start carving with the knife inside these wooden interiors, but they won't, so we will have to go and sort of start cutting for them to start. But the nice thing about this, it sits on the edge of a national park where the reindeer are, that I showed at the beginning. That means the restriction for people to walk in the area behind this is so strong that, and the reason for that is that if you make a step into the landscape, it might take a year before where you put your foot actually is regaining some strength and actually comes back up. So this is the limitation for where people go in this area, particular area, where then the reindeer come up and have a look at the people inside, so it's an opposite zoo. And I think it's important because we are not the owners of these particular situations in landscape. Similarly, we've done a small cabin. Can you see the cabin? I can't point with this here, but can you see the small cabin sitting? Okay. It is a small cabin, 35 square meters big. It's open for everyone. The closest road is about 3.5 hours walking distance away. And it can house 21 people. These people might be a group walking or hitting each other somewhere walking in the mountains, maybe a refugee if the weather gets too cold. That's where they can stay over. They find a bit of food, they find a bit of wood, and they find each other, hopefully. It's a wonderful place to find girlfriends and boyfriends, actually. In Norway, when you walk in the mountains, there are 3 types of different hats that you wear, or these woolen, what's it called? Woolen beanie? Yeah, beanie. If it's green, you're single. If it's blue, you're single and looking. And if it's red, you're not looking and you're not single. So when you walk in the mountains, you can see immediately who you should talk to. What we tried to do was to develop a very old trade, which is the hand making of wooden cladding and wooden panels. So these are made by a guy who's still able to create the wooden panel with the axe. So you can see the movement in the surface, which still relies on sort of the movement of the axe, which gives the wood a very tight surface because everything's with the wood. And at the same time, the lifespan of this wood is, of course, 10 times longer than the wood that is against the grains of the wood. At the same time, it saves a lot of material. It's a place where there's a lot of snow in the winter, so you can understand it's nice to have a small refugee if you're lost in this region. Similarly, we're doing for the tourist industry this little hotel by Lofoten, all the way up in the north. And these objects are a way of trying to look at the natural environment in a possibly a slightly different manner than just as the opposite to nature. Maybe there is a meeting point between how you generate architecture in natural environments and the setting of them. Similarly, we tried in the Alps for a company called Swarovski to design a playground so that kids actually could be in contact with the nature but still play around the whole year. So we would take functions that are normally on the outside of a building into the building and lift them up. So the kids here can play in an endless sort of space that moves them about 20 meters high. They can climb and fall down. Important to have dangerous playgrounds. We even suggested a knife room in the basement where they could, the 5-year-old could carve with their knives, but then Swarovski said no. But Margrethe Martin, she was a German landscape architect, she said every 8-year-old will climb 40 meters high before they stop. And if they stop and don't get down, you pick them down, you get them down somehow. But it's this kind of relationship between indoor-outdoor architectural experience. And to make that very clear also, we referred to a book called The Third Policeman by an Irish author called Flann O'Brien. And in this also, the policeman lives inside the wall. So you split the wall, which is not a volume. It's basically just the borderline between inside and outside. Nobody knows what is actually happening inside the wall. So we split the floor in 2. So it's a wooden floor, it's a solid floor in wood. We would split it in 2 and actually let it come together again. And all of a sudden, kids would become totally intimate with the building. They would be surrounded by floor. And that in itself is about the intimacy of architecture that we're dealing with when it comes to understanding what it is. Similarly, the Norwegian government are doing what is called the scenic routes of Norway, driving, and about 25 places where people can stop and actually just go to the toilet, have something to drink, or the coffee, but they're designed by architects and landscape architects, down to the smallest detail. These are important things. It's not about size, but it's about how it's actually approached, and it's about the mentality of design. That leads us all the way into the beehives, which we're producing in our own workshop. This is the housing for 80,000 inhabitants. It's the biggest housing project we've ever done. And they produce 80 kilograms of honey, which is then being sort of delivered straight into the honey shop below. So now we're producing series of these beehives, which are naturally ventilated, obviously controlled, and actually producing quite good honey, depending on the flowers surrounding it. But it could also be keyless and ready-made. This is a small museum in Kivik in Sweden, which is basically just a concrete box which you use normally for getting rid of water on the roads or similar. It's hard to believe when you see something like that it might become a museum, but it does, because you just drill some holes in the roof, you have a skylight, you put a glass at each end, and you hang one photograph inside, and whoops, you have a museum. That could also be the extension of natural, could also be working with companies like Aesop in Australia. Skin products, which are natural, coming into a situation where you try to deal with the interiors, try to look at the way it is. And this is from an Aesop shop in Oslo. This is biomimicry. I brought this actually because we were having a discussion in Auckland of how to densify Auckland. It's a big discussion. Suburbs, very widespread city, a lot of things happening on the outskirts, and nobody wants to give away space. I said, don't worry. If you put them together with outer limits, they will find and adapt to each other, and they will shape the way they will shape because of the limited space. That's how you find your own way of creating density. Because density happens and adjusts as you move in direction of the things you're doing. But that was a biomimicry pavilion that we're doing in London, close to Paddington, so it actually happened to be also a project. So what about cultural environments? How do they influence design? Okay, let's go all the way back to Michelangelo. This is the stone quarry called La Facciata in Carrara in Italy, where Michelangelo, got his stones. We started looking at this quarry because we needed a stone for the opera house in Oslo. So we went in and looked at the quarry and looked at the faces of the stone and looked at what direction it had and how we could bring it out. And with Jorn Sandnes, we developed a strategy for how to move the stone out of this quarry. Then with 36,000 different stone elements, all of a sudden you have an artscape. And that artscape then is the marble roof. So now all of a sudden we have an opera house in Oslo that comes from the Carrara quarries in Italy, and that is a cultural span of long historical developments. At the same time, I have to say, marble is an unfinished stone. It still is in full tension, which means when you hit the stone, it goes bling. If you hit a granite, it goes because it doesn't have the tension. So that also means, again, back to music, marble has music. So for the opening of the opera house in Oslo, we made a small xylophone out of marble, and we tuned it, and you can play songs on marble. But the art element of it is very important. So these are the pieces that turn it into art, done by an artist. By doing that, we could break all building regulations. Art does not follow building regulations. It is important to put this in perspective, because this roof then creates something new and something different, which we'll see later. But on the interior side, Pei White, an artist from LA, created the stage curtain. I know it looks like aluminum foil, and it has this three-dimensionality, but there is not one silver thread in this piece of art, and there isn't one three-dimensionality or three-dimensional element. It's all just projected as some sort of picture for what is supposed to happen on stage when the curtain goes up. Another artist we worked with is Olafur Eliasson. Here, he made the cover of all the toilets in the lobby of the Opera House. And it's a slow movement, totally slow. This movement of light that you saw takes about 10 minutes. There's a certain slowness to the roof, there's a certain slowness to the lobby, and there's, of course, a certain slowness to an opera. They can be very long. If you know Wagner, they can be totally long. So, in order to regenerate the arts and the art of opera, we had to regenerate the opera typology. There are 14 operas being played all around Europe at the same time, over and over and over again. Which means that we had to change the public, to change the art form. And that we did by letting people onto the roof. No thresholds, completely open. And by doing that, the public has changed. And now they are awaiting changes also when it comes to opera program. But cultural environments can also be working more directly with artists. This is an artist called Bjarne Melgaard. He's Norwegian. He was born in Australia, but he's Norwegian. Works in New York. He came to us and said he would like us to design his house. It's called the House to Die In. That's where he wants to die. It's close to the Munch atelier in Oslo, very close. There's a lot of debate ongoing, of course. We said, we'd love to. How would you like it to look? Like this, he said. This is the house I want. He's an artist who's lived hard. And he's an artist that expects a lot. So we said, fine, beautiful, beautiful, we'll give you this house. But first, we have to agree what your 2D drawings actually mean. So we took parts of the drawings and turned them into 3-dimensional objects in the computer. We sort of tried to give shape to the backside of his drawing to understand what he was actually talking about. And after about 500 objects, we agreed we understand what the backside of the drawing is about. And then we could develop a 3-dimensional house out of these drawings, which were then sort of scanned and treated naturalistically. And once we had a natural representation of this building, we could take out computer information down to about 40%, which would then give us a triangulated form of his drawings. And after that, we would project the original drawing back onto the top of those surfaces, and we would end up with a house like this, which we then, of course, would burn. So we could burn it before he burned it. And working with Olafur Eliasson is the same thing. It's an open, 24-hour accessible cultural event called the Serpentine Gallery Summer Event. And they ask people to design pavilions every year. So it's all about how culture is connected to the people coming and seeing it. And here you could drop in at 4 o'clock in the morning and still have a poem or a music piece happening. This is a reading from Linton Kwesi Johnson, one of the most, or one of the greatest early sort of soul rap connective poets in London. But it could also be temporary structures connecting to culture, like the Tuvaluun, which is a jazz tent in Kongsberg, about an hour out of Oslo, where we created a temporary building which is only up for a week a year for this jazz festival. And here at the end, of course, that's the stage where people are playing the music. Under the big roof, you have the audience. But there is another audience which does not sort of sit under the roof. They're located somewhere downtown where the beer is served. So they can also listen with, because we are throwing the music in 2 directions. One is towards the public, one under the roof, and one towards the public in the city. But it could also be interactiveness in cultural spots of regeneration, like here in London. So these things start working together. There's not one limit to the cultural environment that influences you, influences the form, or influences the way you work. I wanted to show in that context a competition that we lost. It was the M+ Museum in Hong Kong. It was won by Herzog and de Man, and they made a wonderful project. But I like showing this project because it shows very clearly what we've been trying to achieve when we're talking about squatting sites for cultural events. If you have a footprint of a site and the task is to design a cultural building, then you take the whole site. Because the cultural buildings are for the public. And then you make a footprint of that building, which is so large that nothing else will ever have place on that site. It's squatting, but squatting is great in certain situations. So we started off by sort of saying we want the museum, the M+, to be completely horizontal. Unfortunately for the program, the site was slightly too small, so we had to bend it up. But that's the compromise you do in architecture. So architecture is about positive compromise. And that compromise can even be a driving force of finding solutions to things that you didn't know existed. So by doing that, of course, we had a constellation of things happening where the actual entrance is on the roof of the museum. But on top of that, there is another sun shading element that shades that outdoor roof. And between exhibitions and museum spaces, you always move back out, up onto the roof before you dive back in to another exhibition. And that gives a totally different appearance to how, again, slowness and relationship to a city for a cultural venue operates. It was also the first time we started painting black and white renderings and starting to look at renders as a way of expressing what you want. Black and white. Why black and white? Because Down by Law by Jim Jarmusch is a wonderful film, and it's black and white. And I don't know if you know Modesty Blaise. She was a sort of a hero in comics working out of Hong Kong in the 60s and 70s. Wonderful. But these type of things then lead back to certain ways of framing your surroundings, bringing them close. You all know that if you frame something, that what you frame will move into the picture line of the frame. It brings everything closer. But it also is about changing from day to night, or looking at things in perspective, or looking at entrances where you flow in and you know that there is no threshold between you and the museum. There are too many museums in this world saying the public, our visitors, are our greatest enemy. They're here to ruin our art. That's a complete misunderstanding when it comes to museums. These type of spaces then relate to how cultural environments shape the public. We're just finishing off the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and it's been a long process because it's a building that we're adding to a Mario Botta building, which was built about 20 years ago. So how can you actually add a building to a Mario Botta building? Well, I'll talk about that. But first, the building that we're doing is now connecting itself to street level, and again opening. So you have to walk through the Richard Serra sculpture in order to get in. So already at street level, storefront level, you actually move through a sculpture in order to get into the larger space. And from other public areas, you have this view, this slot view into these public spaces. Now this is in San Francisco, and it's tight, and it's earthquake, and it's a vertical museum, but it's taking all the space that it was allowed to take. And then when you come in, it opens up horizontally, brings you back into a narrow line towards the exhibition spaces, and into the exhibition spaces, and then we have a dancing couple, Mario Botta and Snøhetta in this particular case. And as long as you dance well, it doesn't matter what you look like. That means that you lift the people that we interviewed also into a cultural environment, because once these portraits become an exhibition at the Galleria Edis in Berlin, they become cultural personalities. And all of a sudden, they also describe this total combination between research, culture, art. But you know you're getting old. This was the museum you mentioned for the Winter Olympics in Oslo. It was opened in '93. It was the first wooden museum, because wood is kind of domestic as a material, so nobody really wanted it. It's Siberian larch. It's great. It's very tight. But you know you're getting old when you're asked to add on to your own building. So a couple of weeks ago we opened this. So this one was the piano, the grand piano. We strike a string, and art is being enhanced inside this museum and then moved back out into the public. In this new case with an artist called Bård Breivik, we looked at the art as the escape artist on the way out of the building, sort of punching his way out from this metal box. And like I said, it was opened some few weeks ago. He's a good friend of mine. Fortunately, he died only a week before he could see it finished. Which brings me back to the reindeer, 30,000-year-old genetic connection all the way through. And when we started and were asked to do the Lascaux cave painting museum outside of Bordeaux, or northeast of Bordeaux, we found these reindeer, and they are genetically proven to be the same reindeer that are painted on the walls of Lascaux, now living in the mountain area of Snø. And now the caves are closed, so you can't get in, not even as a researcher. So we had to reproduce the caves 1-to-1 scale by scanning them down to 0.3 millimeter and repainting all the paintings, copying them down to the smallest detail. And these 20 artists that are now copying the old caves are discovering layers of art that the scientists have not discovered before, because they have to paint it. They're getting close to this. So it's a way of researching the history by re-implementing history into a cave. So this is opening at the end of this year. And right now, I got some pictures, I think today. We were opening today for the iLight Festival in Singapore. One little structure. Jorunn, I saw you arrived. Jorunn is the artist. Hi. So she's listened to all my lectures now, following me. So she said, "I'm so fed up, I'll just go somewhere else." But she did. But now she's here. So she's been responsible for this pavilion, and what it is, it's 1,000 solar lamps, where they are located inside this vault, bamboo construction. And the light comes directly into one lamp and then gives away the light at the other side. So during the day it shades, and at night it gives light. So it's this kind of inverse type of sculpture where you use exactly what you have in order to translate it directly from shade to light. And the lamps, of course, then will go to Myanmar and be given to those who don't have electricity. So the 1,000 lamps will be distributed at a later stage. Another cultural environment that we're working in is we're doing the Opera House in Busan in South Korea. This is about slowness. And the band is XX, and the design is 2 X's.
Am I blind? You move your hand away from mine. I'm take it as a sign.
By the way, flag. I'm not saying anymore.
That you're any less than mine. Oh, it doesn't move me to be cold. It doesn't lessen my hope. You know our time and all. Oh, let it unfold. I won't leave it untold. The feeling goes on and on and on. In my head,
big shot.
Out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't mean you're not mine. The feeling goes on and on and on.
So it's all about getting under the skin of something, getting so intimate with it that you can own it. And when you can own it, you can sort of make it and turn it to yours, and you will protect it.